Hello, everyone. Welcome to the broadcast. My name is Hiro Natani, VP of Marketing at Agiloft. Welcome again to Agiloft's training webinar entitled Power User, Power Up. Today's broadcast is edited from a hugely popular session delivered by Agiloft Implementation Manager Carey Gibson at the Agiloft Summit in October. It's going to focus on things you can do to personalize your system to maximize efficiency. A couple of housekeeping notes. The presentation part will be about 30 minutes, followed by a Q&A with Carey. It'll be a live Q&A. You can submit your questions in the appropriate window in the GoToWebinar platform at any time during the presentation. We'll also unmute everyone during the live Q&A so you can ask questions live. You can also raise your hand in the GoToWebinar platform. We will host a community session in the Agiloft forum immediately after the webinar, so please join us there. You can join the community session by clicking on the community button on your support login page. You can go directly to community.agiloft.com. Your username and password for the community is the same as your Agiloft support login username and password. It's going to take about a minute or so to queue up the presentation, so just bear with us while we do that.
My goal in this session is to hopefully give you a better understanding of some of the things that you're able to do as a power user to adjust the system to make it behave the way that you want to behave, even if you are not necessarily an admin user. So today, our agenda, we're going to go over a little bit about dashboards and how you can personalize the left pane. We'll talk a little bit about shortcuts and what you can do to adjust user preferences. We'll also take a look at the various ways to search in the system using either the global search, the quick search, and then saved searches. We'll take a brief look at table views and some of the neat things that you can do with those, including some of the new data types that now you can include in table views. And then we'll look at what we think are some best practices when you're looking at configuring record views, and how as a staff user you can navigate through those with as much ease as possible. So what I'm going to be doing is hopefully bouncing back and forth a little bit between PowerPoint and then actually getting into Agiloft so we can look at things in more detail. But with dashboards, this is what we consider to be sort of the home page for staff users. And when we're working with our customers, we're really trying to make sure that we keep business users in mind. So when we're doing an implementation, we're trying to understand what exactly they need to see every time they log into the system. Whatever they might need to do or see at a glance, we're trying to make sure that they've got ways of doing that. And one of the things that we hope you're able to do as an admin is step into that role and take it over, because of course your organization changes, you've got new teams coming on board, and you want to make sure that you can keep those dashboards updated and provide all of these things to your users. So in terms of dashboards, there is actually a whole other session on dashboards that's going to get into it in a lot more detail, run by Alice, and that's a really great session that I'll be doing with her. So we'll check that out too. But essentially what you can do as an admin, you can direct power users to go to their primary team's default dashboard as soon as they log in. And then that power user is able to switch to whatever dashboard they might want to look at just based on their team membership. So if I'm a contract manager, but I'm also on a clinical trial team, I might be able to switch to my clinical trial homepage, and that might give me some different options. They're published to teams, so you can set it to have the person go to their default dashboard by their primary team, and they're made up of widgets, and there are lots and lots of different kinds of widgets, including things that really help your users check out the system and drive it via a data-driven process. So you can use drill down and filtered charts and reports. You can include navigable table views, and you can also include hot links that let you set the values of fields kind of behind the scenes. So all your user has to do is click on a link to create a BAA or to create an NDA or to do lots of different things in the system. And those are really easy to configure. So if you're trying to set this up as an admin, you can go to Setup and Look and Feel, And then this is kind of where you get into all of that configuration that might have to do with setting up the left pane for a default or configuring those general preferences. And the option that you would be choosing is that last one, which is probably really hard to see, but it says last selected or default dashboard. So that'll make it so that when someone logs in, they'll either be taken to their default dashboard or the last one they chose when they were logged into the system. Okay, and what we're going to do now is switch over to Agiloft, and we can take a look at some of these dashboards. So what we're seeing right now, this is the contract management homepage, and you can see that it's got lots of charts and reports. It's also got some table variables that are configured to just tell you things at a glance about your system. And we've also got set up a navigable table view that's set up with a filter on top of it. So this is something that you can set up when you're configuring a dashboard, and Alice will get into this in a little bit more detail. But if we go to edit that dashboard and we take a look at this table here, active contracts filtered by contract type, we can tell the system that we want the filter to apply to that, and then go to the filters tab, and you can set up a number of filters then that will help drive that report. So what your users are able to do is type in this case, what kind of contract type they want to filter that active set down to. So that just gives you a little bit more flexibility as a power user to really see what you want to see just based on that dashboard without it having to be hard-coded. So that's one of the things that you can do in a contract management homepage. The service desk homepage has some good examples of these hot links I was talking about. So you can do this for contract management too, but what's happening behind the scenes here, when you click on that link, it's telling the system to go ahead and create a new record in the table, and it's told it to set some of the fields behind the scenes. So things like service category and the service as a password reset. So if you have things that you know that your users are doing all of the time and it feels tedious to them to have to select the business unit, the department, the division, the whatever, you might consider creating a hot link that lets your users do those things really quickly. And then you can place that on a home page. Agiloft makes it really easy to configure those hot links. So I can open this up and show you just briefly what that looks like. If we're looking at hot links, and I go to edit that, and we go to options. Let me just blow that up so you can see it. These are all the different ones that we've set up so far. And just like everything else in Agiloft, you don't necessarily have to know how to code to make it behave the way that you want it to behave. So the wizard really helps you figure out what you're trying to do. In this case, we're trying to create a new record. And then you can consistently add another field after another field to set the values that you want. And once you click Compose Hyperlink, it's going to go ahead and make that hyperlink behave the way that you want it to behave when users click on, when they click on the link. Okay, so a couple of examples of dashboards there. The other thing that I've seen people do with hot links is point people toward outside resources, which can be really helpful. So if you have a complicated contracting process and a lot of business rules that your users need to be aware of and what they need to follow, you can have them directed to go to your intranet page and have them directed to a list of people that they can contact about various things that they need to know about when they're creating a BAA or something like that. So that's another really useful feature for dashboards. Let's see, I'm going to flip back to PowerPoint now. Personalized left panes, this is also a really handy feature. So the left pane, of course, is how you navigate the system as a power user. It kind of acts as a navigable table of contents in a way. And admins can set them up a couple of different ways. Some admins choose to have one default left pane for all users, and then they rely on group permissions to make tables visible when they're supposed to be visible. The other option you have is you can create multiple left panes and apply them to teams. So if you have a clinical trial team that needs to be able to see things in a different way in their left pane from your contract management team, you might decide, I want to have a contract management team left pane, and I want to have a clinical trial team left pane. And so the combination of the team and the group permissions will make the right tables show up in that left pane. Just like we talked about with general preferences, as an admin, you can set this up across the board for everyone by going to Setup, Look and Feel, and then Configure Left Pane. In group permissions, though, as an admin, you can also expose a lot of this stuff to your power users. So if you want to make it so that your power users have the ability to customize the left pane for themselves, you can turn that on in group permissions, and then users, when they log in as a power user, they can go into their left pane and click Preferences and then configure their own left pane. One of the nice things about being able to customize the left pane, I think, is that you can repeat tables in groupings, which is really helpful in a lot of ways. We use Agiloft for internal things like managing projects and keeping track of tickets, and I created a little bit in my left pane that has my most used tables. So even though they're not logically related, because I'm always in projects and I'm in hours and I'm in tickets, those are my top 3 in my personalized left pane that just lets me get to them really quickly. So there are a couple of main areas in the left pane. There's My Assigned, Last Opened, and then the table list that is sort of a combination of the table name as well as whatever saved searches you've said should show up in that left pane. So what we're going to do is take a look at how you go about customizing some of that. And I'm going to do that as a user. So we can go into Preferences and then left pane setup. And when you're looking at this, this is drag and droppable. Might not initially be apparent, but if you wanted to have Last Opened appear before My Assigned, you can just drag and drop it into place. You can also click on each of these to get a few more options. So for example, Last Opened, I use this a lot. If I happen to be working within 5 records during a given day, I can keep them in my Last Opened area, and then that's a really quick way just to go back to those records. If I need more than that, I can adjust it, and maybe I want to have 7 as the maximum number that I can see in that Last Opened area. You can also specify whether you want it opened in view mode or edit mode, so that's something else you can set. When you click on My Assigned, you also get this option, which lets you see the number of assigned records next to each search. And what that ends up looking like is here in this My Assigned area, you'd see a number, and that tells you at a glance how many records you have that have met that search. So some people really do like to see that as a glance. At a glance, sometimes it can be maybe a little scary if you realize you've got so many pending approvals that you're behind on. One thing to be aware of, that does slow the system down a little bit when you're logging in. So it's a trade-off, but that's one thing that you can do. With tables, you can go to the next tab, and this is how you can set up different categories. And again, this is just drag and drop, so if we wanted to create a new grouping like most used, we could create that. And then whatever tables I'm able to see appear in that left pane, and I can add it over to the side. So as soon as I've done that and I click Finish, you end up seeing that there in your left pane, and your users are able to kind of get to things the way they want to get to them. Okay, let's see. The other thing that's available on the left pane are whatever searches you've said that you want to see over there. So as an admin, when you're creating saved searches, the Apply tab gives you those options to say, I want this search to show up in My Assigned, or I want this search to show up in the left pane under the table that it has to do with. So as an admin, or as a user who's able to modify searches that apply to other people, those are some of the options you can set. And that's a really handy way, I think, for power users to see the system. I think they often think of these saved searches that appear on the side as if they're folders, and that's where those contracts are stored. It's really just a saved search, but it's a nice logical grouping and gives them fast access to those searches that they need to use all the time. Let's see, we can also take a quick look at shortcuts and the help system. So over on the side, let me see if I can scroll over there. The top right has a help menu, which I think often disappears, but this is also customizable. So if you have custom help, you can actually easily create a link to that to have it appear right in the system for your users to reference. And then shortcut help is here. And some of these are really useful. There are a few that I use all of the time. I'm going to flip back to PowerPoint now, and I can show you some of those in a slightly easier to see area. So Alt-H, if you're a power user, will take you right back to your home screen. If you're using your mouse, you can always click on home and it'll show you your default dashboard. But if you do Alt-H and want to stay on the keyboard, that's where it'll take you. My absolute favorite one, thank you Bridget, wherever Bridget is Alt-T. So sometimes that left pane gets really long with lots and lots of tables, and you go, where in the world is the table I'm looking for in that logical grouping? If you do Alt-T and you start typing the table that you're looking for, it'll auto-complete, and you can find it and just click on it, and your table is there. That's an awesome one. There are a couple of others as a power user that are super handy, Alt-C and Control-Enter. So when you're working in record view, if you don't want to lose all the work that you've been doing in your record, and you want to save and continue and keep that record open, you can do Alt-C. It'll still yell at you if you haven't finished all of your required fields. So make sure that you've entered all your required fields, but Alt-C is a good one. Control and Enter is similar. That just does a save and close. So it'll close and take you back to the table view. Another one as an admin that I find super handy is Control-F, which isn't necessarily a special Agiloft shortcut, but if you're ever trying to adjust fields in a table and you're looking at this big long list and you can't find it, do Control-F and find in page and start typing, and it'll just find it just as a browser-based tool. It's a really nice one too. Nice one. All right. Let's see. Now I really want my coffee too, but I'll have to wait. So let's see. Is there something I missed there? There are a couple of things that I do adjust in preferences, and I don't think I showed that last time. I do prefer to open up things in new tabs rather than new windows. So you might decide that this is an option that you'd like to check, open a new browser tab, not new window. I do not recommend confirming cancellation before closing a former window. That just pops up way too often, but this is a nice one. Okay, let's see. I'm going to move on to saved searches and how you can search in the system. So there are lots of ways to find data in the system, and that's really why your users are entering data in the first place. So we really want to make sure that we make searches as friendly as possible. What we're looking at up there where it has company name highlighted, that's what we call the quick search. If for some reason your users don't see it, it's probably just because it's been collapsed. And if they click on the word search, it pops it up. Click on the word search again and it disappears. So if for some reason that's not there, that's why. Just click on search. And there are a couple of tips and tricks to know about using that quick search. One is that quick search can get really long. That drop-down list can get long and confusing. So if your users are finding that they don't know what half the fields mean that are showing up in that drop-down, it means that as an admin, it's probably a good idea for you to get into the back end of that table, go to Setup Table, Indexes, and then there's an action button for Edit Quick Search Fields. And you can just deselect the ones that your users aren't really going to use in quick search, and it'll make that list a lot smaller and a little bit more friendly. The other thing to know is that while you may be storing lots of fields that are considered to be numbers, if you type in a number into that box, it's automatically going to search the Agiloft ID. So if I were to type 204 in here, it is not going to search any other field as long as text is selected. It's going to search the Agiloft ID field. So that's handy if you know the Agiloft ID. If what you're really trying to do is look for company number or something like that, you want to make sure that your users are using this quick search selection to choose the field that they want to search within for that number, specifically for numbers. There are some other really nice features that are kind of buried in that quick search. One of them is active only. The other one is refine. And then there's a way that power users can actually get in and manage their own searches on a personal level that don't affect anybody else who's using the system. So I'm going to go here and show you a little bit about how that works. If you do have users who are using this search, the global search at the top, one thing to be aware of there is that it is searching all tables in the system that they have access to. So it takes longer. That's not typically how I end up searching. I usually do the quick search more often, but that's what that global search does. It's searching all of the tables, and then it'll chunk it up where it finds those results. So what we're looking at here, active only and refine, these are great little checkboxes. Active only really lets you search a subset of what you've already found. And active only doesn't necessarily have to do with status. It doesn't have to mean that the status of this contract is active. It really means that as a user, you can define what active means to you. So maybe it means that they're active contracts, but maybe for you, what active means is my department contracts. Those are the ones I care about. To me, that's what's active. So you could choose that search and say, that's what I mean. I mean contracts in the current fiscal year. That's what's active to me. So if you set that, and you set that there in active records, when you click finish, anytime that you are showing all of your contracts and then you decide to say show active only, it's going to filter that list to just the ones that meet the search that you've defined as active only. Does that make sense? The refine checkbox is similar. So if you check refine and you've already got a search result displaying, you might decide that you want to search for something else within the results that are already displaying. So you can check refine and then search again, and it'll whittle it down further. If you ever lose track of everything that you've been searching for, you can click that hyperlink, and that will remind you what all is included in that search. Let's see. A couple of other things. Saved searches. So saved searches are available here in this dropdown, and those are generally set up by an admin, and the reason that they show up there is if you are in that saved search and you're on the last tab, and I'm in there as a contract manager. That is a bad example. Let's go this way and take a look at a saved search. The last tab is the apply tab. And as an admin, that's how you decide where it's going to go and how people are going to see it. So accessible to any of these groups, active for these groups means it's going to appear in that search dropdown. So when a user hovers over it, if they're a member of these groups, that's when they're going to see it. The other options you have are making it visible in the left menu as a saved search. So if you checked it off here, it would show up under contracts as a saved search. And you can also make it show up in My Assigned for these users. So for every saved search as an admin, you've got that ability. You can also expose that ability to users in groups if you want them to be able to publish searches. Power users also have the ability to affect what shows up in their system on a personal level. So if I'm here as a contract manager and I go to search, I get a manage option. And the manage option really lets me choose, I've got to scroll over. It gives me access to these other checkboxes. So if I'm logged in and I want to see the search in My Assigned, even though my admin doesn't think it's applicable, I can click Show in My Assigned, and it's going to show up in that area in the left pane. They can also click Show in Left Pane, and it'll show up appropriately then within that table grouping. So that's something that power users are able to do for themselves without needing an admin's help. What we often find is that users need to be able to run searches that they don't want hard-coded. So if you haven't played with runtime searches, they are really, really handy and very user-friendly. So if you're finding that users are always needing to run the same kind of search, but they are intimidated by having to go into that search dialog themselves, you can allow them to, or you can set up a runtime search and then have it show up in the left pane. So for example, if we're looking at this save search, you can see how this one is now coming up with a dialog box that prompts me for the company name and the contract type. If I want to, I can uncheck contract type, and it'll search for any value in contract type, but maybe it's only going to find company name is IBM. And I find nothing because I forget to uncheck those boxes. You have to be careful about that. So runtime searches are super handy. The way that you set those up, if you've not done it before, you're looking at this option right here, runtime, and that allows the user to really control the data when they're running that search. And then if you want to, you can also make that pop up in their left pane. So sometimes that's something that's really handy for users if they're always wanting to find active contracts, but they want to supply the company name at runtime. You can create a runtime filter, go ahead and have that saved search appear in the left pane for all of the contract managers, and it gives them a really easy way to find that data. Okay, so we've talked about searches. The other thing that you end up seeing is the view. So the view is not controlling the order of the records, it's not controlling which records show up, but it's controlling the view of those records now that you've found them. So you can create lots of different views for a table and really take advantage of some nice features of the system that let your users kind of get an at-a-glance understanding of the records they're looking at. So for example, in this particular one, this is an alert view that shows color coding depending on whether the expiration notification date has passed. So for alert coloring, that's all based on a choice field in the table. And you can set that up in the view, and you can say when the status is whatever, or when an alert color is red, and that's a choice value, then you can go ahead and say what the row coloring should be, for example. There are other views. Let's see. I'm going to switch over to my admin view. There are other views that let you do a similar thing with icons. So this is also based on a choice field, and you can color code what you want to have display there based on status. So we've got set role coloring or define notification icons, and we can see that we're basing it on status and then setting up the icons that we want to display based on each of those values. So it's kind of a nice subtle way to be able to get an at-a-glance view of what that looks like. Some of the other things that you can include now in views are accessible to users when they're able to create their own views, or you can drop them in a view for your users. You do have to do the back-end work of creating these data types, but for example, you can include the diagram for the contract. So if you think that your users are going to want to explore and be able to look at master agreements, and you want to see how they're related to other contracts, you can go ahead and include that on the view, and that's also navigable. So if I wanted to click on that, I could actually open up that contract from this record. So that's a nice way to navigate the system. The other thing that you can do is include a heat bar in a view. And my friend Dick in the back is actually going to go over this in a bit more detail in one of his presentations. But this gives you an at-a-glance picture of what it looks like when something is pending approval. So a heat bar can be based on a related table. And this is similar to the other thing that we just looked at, where you can color code and say, pending approvals, I want to be yellow. Queued approvals, I want to be gray. And anything that's already been approved, I want to be green. And then you can have the numbers display so that you can see at a glance, this contract has 3 approvals, and we know that 1 is approved, 1 is queued, and 1 is pending. You can include that if you want to in the record view as well. You can also switch views, so there may be times that you want to see things in different ways, and you can expose those to users, again, to teams, and then allow your users to go to the view drop-down and switch the view that they're looking at. Let's see, I'm going to use my fancy shortcut trick, if I can remember what it is, Alt-T, and I want to go to the products table. So one of the other data types that you can include is an image. And you can, in your view, specify what you want to have happen. It's nice to see my bunnies here too. That's Pancakes the Comfort Bunny. So you can configure your images to be clickable. And when you click on them, you can also have it behave in different ways. You could have it open up the record in view mode. You could have it open up in edit mode. And what we just did here is we configured it to open up the summary layout, which is a relatively new feature. But what that lets your users do is edit a record, just a few fields. And it's just a fast, easy way to make small adjustments to a record, and we call it the summary view. We'll take a look at how you set that up in just a minute. So that's the product image. The other thing that you can do is set up quick editable fields, which is also really useful. Again, you've got a little bit of back-end work to do when you're configuring it in the field wizard. You want to make sure that it is quick editable. But once it is, you can drop it then into a view, and that allows the user to click right on it and make changes right then and there. You can actually go through and make changes to multiple records and then save all of your changes at once. So that's another nice feature. You might use that to add notes to a record, to change the status quickly, various things like that. The other thing that you can do, and I don't happen to have an example of this, but you can also drop action buttons into views. So if you needed someone to approve a record, for example, you could consider dropping an action button onto that view and let them act on the action button. Okay, I'm going to flip back to PowerPoint here for just a second, make sure I haven't skipped anything super important. Okay. So let's take a look at how you set up some of those options. When we go into set up contracts, for example, and we go to the layout tab, the layout tab gives you a couple of options here, including the summary layout. So this behaves just like the power user layout or the end user layout. There's one summary layout per table, and you just drag and drop your fields onto there. Once you've dragged and dropped them, you can specify that in a view that you want it to display the summary layout. I'm not used to talking for such a long period of time without asking if there are any questions from the audience, so I'm glad you all have your coffee. Let's see. So in terms of record views, there are a couple of things that we try to keep in mind as we're designing a system. What we think are sort of best practices in a record view. So you know about the common area. The common area is generally up at the top. We try to keep it limited to just those most important fields in a record, so things like the ID, the status, the assigned person. You don't want it to get really, really long, because if you've got multiple tabs, all of a sudden everything gets really, really long. But the common area is good for those fields that somebody needs to be able to see no matter what tab they might be on in the record. The other thing that you can do is use tabs and then use headings to try to break up the fields into logical chunks. And I don't know if you realize it or not, but you can actually collapse and expand those headings. So as you're working through a record, you can collapse them. It's also configured via HTML, so I have seen some neat things where you might include an image. You can include more sort of verbose text that gives you more explanation about what you're supposed to be doing within that section. You can also define in the layout that you want one of those sections to appear collapsed by default rather than open by default. So sometimes you might do that in the history tab if you wanted the history to appear collapsed by default. So those are a couple of things that we might recommend. And this varies. We try to keep required fields on the first tab of a record, just because you can't save the record until they're all filled out. But it is customer preference, and we have had use cases where it's just needed to go on separate tabs, but it tends to be a little bit easier if you do keep the required fields on the first tab. We also try to keep the layout keyboard friendly and the display choices keyboard friendly, so that you're not always having to use your mouse. You might notice that as you're working in a form, if you do use tab, it's moving across the record. Here's another really good tip. If your user says, I can't do anything in this record, I'm in it and I can't do anything, ask them if they see an edit button. If you see an edit button, it means you're not in edit mode. You're not going to be able to do anything in that record. So if I'm in this first tab and I'm going back and forth, it's going across the screen. So it's just a good idea to kind of keep that in mind, that if you do have users who are using their keyboard, that you want to make it friendly that way. There are also data types that can be a little bit friendlier. If you use a drop down rather than a radio button, for example, you do have the advantage of autocomplete, so you can use keystrokes to go ahead and select like the first record in a drop down. And the other thing is to make sure that you're keeping conditional visibility in mind. So when we're configuring the system for customers, we're trying to find out if fields are reliant on other fields and only making them display when it's relevant. So there are a lot of different ways to do that in the field wizard. You can do something like extra fields to show in contract type, for example, so that if it's one contract type, it might have 5 special fields that show up that wouldn't show up for another kind of field. The other thing I did not show you that is relatively new, when you're setting up a table and you're in layout mode, let's see, the common area. The common area has a few new options. You can have it appear to the left or the right if you want to. So kind of like the navigable left pane, you could have the common area appear to the left of a record so that you get a little bit more vertical space on the right. Sometimes that's helpful. You might want to do that in like an employee record or something like that. So you might make some different decisions just depending on the table that you're working in. Okay, I think I have just whizzed through everything.
Okay, thank you, the recorded version of Carey. Now we're going to open it up to the live Q&A. So I'm going to kick off with one question we always get. Will the recording be available after the webinar? And the answer to that is yes. We will post this edited version of the training under events and webinars in the next 24 to 48 hours. So I'll kick off the questions with a popular one as well, Carey. One is, how can I create folders in Agiloft to store records? Is this something only admins can do?
So no, and hi everybody. Thank you so much for coming to the webinar today. So yeah, these are the saved searches that the virtual version of me was talking about. So you can do that as a user by creating your own search, and then on the very last tab of the search wizard, there's an option to make that available in your left pane. So you can either click the box to make it available in your left pane, and that will kind of act like a search folder, or you can stick it up in the My Assigned area, and then you'll be able to see it in your left pane there too. There is actually an option that admin users would have to set so that you're able to do that. If you find that you're not able to create your own searches, that is a good time to reach out to your Agiloft admin to find out if it's possible to change a setting so that you can do that.
Okay, another one. How are searches organized in My Assigned in the left pane? How can I make that area less cluttered?
Yes, that is a really good one. So it turns out that it's alphabetical. It's basically alphabetical. So when you're looking in the left pane and you're looking under contracts, for example, all of the saved searches that you've got in that area are arranged alphabetically. There are ways to adjust it a little bit. So you can, for example, prepend numbers to the beginning of the label of your saved search, and that can move things up in the list. Sometimes we'll also use tricks where we'll stick in an asterisk at the very beginning of your search label, and that can also bump it up to the top. But I do remember recently there being an enhancement created where we may consider a way to try to set an order for those saved searches so that you have a little bit more control over it other than just kind of playing with the saved search label.
Okay. Next one is, how can I tell how many records are returned by a search?
That's a good one too. That's another one of those kind of secret hyperlinks that shows up. So if you click on a table in your left pane, and then you have a search that you've decided to run using that search dropdown, way at the very top, just above the search block, it'll have a status for that search. It'll say something like status 5 records found, 1 page, click for details. If you click for details, it'll show you the search criteria, but there's often a little hyperlink that you can click to have it count those records.
Okay, ones come in by text. Is it possible to search for only particular attachment types, such as a fully executed document?
Yeah, that is possible. Sometimes what you end up having to do is search a different table. So I think sometimes your inclination is to go directly to the contracts table and try to find attachments in there. And that's often not the most expedient way to do it. So what you could do instead, if you have the attachments table showing on your left pane, you could go directly to the attachments table, and then using that quick search dropdown, you could choose attachment type. And then that little search area at the very top is going to read attachment type either equals fully executed document or whatever kind of attachment type you're looking for. And you could do it that way. You could also do it within the contract that you're on and looking at the contract attachments tab and looking at a search there if you have a very long search list.
Okay. Is it possible to have Agiloft send you a prompt if you sent a contract out for signature and haven't received it back in a certain time, so you remember to follow up?
Ah, that's a good one, and I'm so glad to see this questioner here. Thank you for coming. Yes, it is possible to do that. If you happen to be using DocuSign, I know that you can configure DocuSign to do that automatically. You could have Agiloft do that as well, although I think it would take some configuration. I don't think that that's something that we've got set up in our out-of-the-box standard to send out reminders, but it's definitely possible to do that.
Okay.
The other thing that you could do, Marcella, now that I'm thinking about it, is you could create a saved search to look at the date that it was sent for signature and craft a calendar search or a time search to find out how long ago that was. And you could have a little saved search in your left pane that would show you those things. Yeah.
Okay, another one. How can I make fields quick editable?
That's a good one. Quick Edit is a really nice feature, and it relies on a couple of things. So one, the admin does need to do a little bit of work in the setup. For one thing, the field needs to be set up to be quick editable in the field wizard. And then group permissions also control whether or not you can interact with a quick editable field in a couple of ways. One, that you can interact with a quick editable field at all, and that's on the record tab of group permissions. And then there's another option that you can set as an admin that says if a user is able to create their own views or work with their own views, can they add a field that is quick editable to that view? So it kind of relies on a combination of those things, but it is a really handy feature to allow quick edit.
Okay, last question before we continue in the community. In relation to the question asked about reminders of contracts that are still unexecuted, can the power user configure those reminders if we don't have DocuSign? Or is this something my implementer would have to do?
Yeah, so it kind of depends on how savvy you feel and how comfortable you feel in the system. So if you're an admin user, it's possible for you to configure that. If you are a power user and you have the ability to set up searches, you could go the route that I was talking about before, where you could have a search that could show up on a dashboard or in your left pane that shows you overdo signatures or something like that. And that would take a little bit of work on figuring out how best to use some of those search operators. You could reach out to your implementer, and one of the things that we like to do is teach you how to do something on a call. So that might be a nice way to do it. It's kind of a good training exercise, and they can help you out with that on a Zoom call, and that way you'd know how to do it yourself.
Great, thanks, Carey. We've come to the end of our time on the webinar. Thanks everyone for joining us on this one.